Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining us today for what I hope will be a thought-provoking and even perhaps a behaviour-changing debate. Fair filming, imperialism or inquiry. I think it's very fitting, actually, that we're in this building that is absolutely a kind of the epitaph, isn't it, to colonialism and imperialism and the power of the state and authority in the West. It's absolutely, it's the perfect setting. But anyway, those of you who are already documentary makers are probably already, as a matter of course, thinking through whether the work you do is sustainable. Are you actually thinking about your responsibility in terms of culture and behaviours and communities and ethics? That's what we want to discuss today. If we were to grant a fair filming kite mark, and that's something that the organisation I represent, One World Media, is trying to do at the moment to establish a kite mark. If we were to create a kite mark, what would the tick boxes be? What would it look like? What would you need to do? And do the same rules apply across all territories? Can they apply across all territories? So that's what we're going to look at today. My name is Shyama, Perera. I'm from One World Media. On the 18th of June, we celebrate, as we do every year, our annual awards where we give prizes to the best international reporting from and about the developing world. So this is something that is very close to our hearts, and we are extremely proud to be co-presenting this session with Discovery Network International, which is an organisation that has known for a very long time about the rules and regulations required when you are working in other territories with 48 international brands and going into 220 countries. It's probably as much a business case as it is a good practice case, but we will find out more about that from Helen Hawken shortly, who we're very lucky to have with us. She's Head of Production and Development Factual at Discovery, and she's on the end, and she's the person on whose desk your proposals land. Next to Helen is Siobhan Sinnerton, who is Commissioning Editor for News and Current Affairs at Channel 4. It is who is responsible for the wonderful Unreported World, which has won endless awards. She uncovers stories and talent from across the globe, and in fact she took some time off to make a film herself from Afghanistan last year and won an award for that too, so there you go. Femi Odugbemi has actually flown here just for today from Nigeria, so we are delighted to have him here. Apart from the fact that he is obviously the ultimate in cool, he is also a very well-known filmmaker. His film Biagra Boys won an award, and I'm not sure if I should be saying that Biagra or Biagra, and I should have checked that beforehand. It's probably like Biafra, is it?
Bariga Boys.
Bariga Boys, well there you are. And Tinsel, which is a Nigerian soap opera. He is also director of IREP, which is an African documentary film festival. So we're going to get some really good views today, right across the board. Tom Beard's work with Keo Films, a lot of you will be familiar with. They're often collaborations, the narrative emerging from the research that's being done. He directed the acclaimed Welcome to India, and more recently, Antarctica, Britain's whale hunters, though we may not get there today. Jezza Neumann, he's greeted everybody in the room, so I assume that this is all his home team here, runs True Vision and is an award-winning documentary maker and executive producer. His vision is actually about changing the world, though he will argue that, and it has led to work like Zimbabwe's Forgotten Children and True Stories' War Child. To get us started, each of the panellists is going to discuss an ethical problem that they have thought about or had to deal with in relation to their work when on a foreign ground in the developing world. And I'm going to go in reverse order from the end. So we're going to start with Jezza Neumann.
Hello, and thanks for coming today. So I thought, as there are lots of filmmakers and budding filmmakers here, we might as well start with a clip. It avoids you having to listen to me talk for all the 5 minutes. So we're going to start with a clip, and I'm going to send you to Gaza with this first clip. So just scene set, send you to Gaza. So Channel 4 asked me whether I'd go to Gaza and make a film looking at the children's plight post the war. And whilst I was out there, they also asked me to look at what other stories were unfolding. And one of the stories that was still occurring on a daily basis is that the fishermen were being attacked by the Israeli Navy. And so I went about to try and secure also access to a family who are a fishing family. And during that journey, I went to meet a man who had a fishing boat, and it's actually the young boy who's having his head stuck in the bucket in that opening clip. And when I first met him, the man just said to me, well, why should I talk to you? You guys come here with your cameras all the time, and you take pictures, and they go away, but nothing changes. Nothing changes for me. Look around me. Look at my house. Look at my boat. We're shot at all the time. Why should I talk to you? We've just had enough. And I was taken aback, and I was there, and I was thinking, well, why should you? And then I thought for a moment, and I said to him, look, I've travelled far away from my family, who I've left behind. I'm here for many weeks. I'm committed to trying to tell this story and to bring what's happening to you back to the Western world. And the point is, for me, is that if we stop doing it, then no one will ever hear your story. And I can't guarantee to you that there will be change out of what I do, but the minute we stop trying, then there's certainly no hope. And I just thought back to the strapline of True Vision, which was actually set up by Brian and Deborah, and the strapline to the company is, it's better to light a single candle than to curse the darkness. And that was the premise upon which I felt, yes, this is why it's right to do it. Because if we don't, then people will never hear about these situations. And obviously, you hope you might evoke change, but you can't always guarantee it. And in fact, in the pursuit of trying to evoke change or make change with the stories you tell or give voice to the voiceless, things can go wrong, and things can happen that you, as much as you try to protect your subject or discuss your issues, you get curveballs. So I'm actually going to play you another clip that's from South Africa. It's a young girl who, this film was actually shot by Deborah Shipley and Kalisa Sotoli for True Vision, but I think it's a very powerful example of what we're trying to discuss here on the panel, whereby they'd gone to make a film about young girls in South Africa transitioning from primary school to secondary school, when they met this young girl and asked her, what are the issues in your life that are very important to you that you want to tell us about? And this is what she said. So you've just seen something that was broadcast on television that if that had been shot in the UK, you could not have broadcast it. This was the first time that this story, which then became something that they discovered time and time again and reshaped that film. That film then became about those issues that she faced. You were able to show that particular story and the stories that followed because the community actually knew all about her. Her mother gave informed consent, she gave informed consent, and the most important issue about that and why it could be shown is because the community already knew about it. So it wasn't as if she would suffer because of this film being shown. But even so, if she had given that interview in the UK, the laws would have meant that we couldn't have broadcast it. We did everything we could, and the filmmakers did everything they could to support her. After transmission, viewers wanted to help. Well, the True Vision has a foundation that supported her after the transmission. She had counselling, and things were improved for her. The police investigated her case in a way that they would never have done if the film had not been broadcast. So one can say, we did a good job. True Vision did a good job. The channel did a good job. We told a story that needed to be told. We gave voice to someone who desperately wanted that voice, and it was great. It was good. It was a good example of why these films can happen and make a difference. There was, however, a curveball, and the curveball was that 2 years later, an advertising agency for a major pharmaceutical company took her photo off our website and put it on a leaflet for a depot dose contraceptive. That leaflet was then distributed at her school. She completely relives the horrors of what she had gone through, and she's once again traumatized. Now you have to ask yourself the question, and we have to ask ourselves the question, was it worth it? Now that we've put her through that for a second time, was it the right thing to do? And you re-question it. What we have done since is we have supported trying to pursue claims against the pharmaceutical company for doing that. But again, how long do you keep doing that? How long do you keep trying? They made an offer, a paltry offer. It's a great offer in terms of the South African economy and what she would receive and her family receive. But in terms of the pharmaceutical company and a Western offer, it's paltry. So how long do you keep pursuing that for a better offer? And who are you pursuing it for? At what point do you just have to go, fine, let's just take the offer, let's give her the money, let her get over this and move on? That's a curveball we could never have predicted. It's something that we have had to rethink about now. We have to remember that even when you extract from a country, when you finish the film, when the film's gone on air, when you've put together a foundation that follows up on these children, you still have to remember that there will be things that could trip you up further down the line, and it means you really do have to keep caring far further than just a couple of months after the film's gone out.
Jezza, thank you. Tom.
Hello, everyone. I'd like to talk a bit about fairness in relation to contributors as well. My foreign filming is rather different to Jezza's, though. I've mainly made anthropology series for TV. So rather than having a burning single issue underpinning it, it's more based on a broader belief that a better understanding of one culture by another is a good thing. And I think this broader basis means that anthropology films essentially just have to have fairness at their core and start from a starting point that all cultures are equally valid. So maybe not some of the dilemmas of a pressing issue outweighing fairness towards an individual, which some single issue films might have, but fairness is absolutely fundamental there. But of course, what we see is that, or what I've found frequently is that fairness is open to some cultural interpretation. So each place you go to and each kind of film you're trying to make, there has to be a working out process of how you need to be fair. For the BBC, they say that fairness is we will be open, honest, straightforward, and fair in our dealings with contributors, and those are all very, very good adjectives to have. But obviously, it all depends on how you implement them. And we found with some of the work we've done at Keo Films that a good way of beginning the fairness, even before you're on the ground, is by having a form of the documentary which encourages collaboration, essentially, with contributors. And a series we made a few years ago called Meet the Natives. We made two series, actually, one for Channel 4 and one for Travel Channel and National Geographic, which invited a group of men from a traditional community in the South Pacific to travel to the UK for the first series, to the US for the second, to meet us, the natives, on and explore our culture. They had links with our cultures anyway, the spiritual links. So they wanted to make this journey. I travelled out there to talk to them about it, and one of the sort of core bases of starting off on a fair footing, I think, is to fully discuss and openly talk over the project and the broader narrative of what you're trying to do. And in this project, I started by asking them exactly what they wanted to find out about the natives of the UK or the natives of America. And also, we gave them a camera as well, so that they could be very empowered and join in with the filmmaking process, which they absolutely did. Maybe we can see a bit of that now, please. So as you can see from that clip also, JJ, the translator, one of the 5 who came to the UK for that trip, is also the narrator. And we flew him to the UK to help with the edit and writing the script. And then he read that script in the VO booth. So I think that by making sure there's collaboration from the very beginning with that project, we helped to to not only mean that everyone involved understood the filmmaking process much better and what we were trying to do, but also make sure that they were fairly represented. And I think that came across in a series which otherwise could have been much more looking at people struggling in our culture if it had been done in a different way. And that relationship with the villages in Vanuatu continues, and they had a big cyclone out there earlier this year, I'm sure many people heard about, and we were able to get support to them much faster than the NGOs and the government could. So, we have a long-term relationship there, which, as Jezza was saying, I think it's really important, not long after the filming's finished. But that's obviously quite a specific way of doing things, and in more traditional observational films, maybe collaboration like that might be a little less overt. And another way we found that sometimes fairness can be added to, or we can ensure that there is, fair dealings with contributors, is by making sure we get to know everyone and understand their world really, really well. And that's partly been by having the luxury of spending a lot of time on the ground, which is certainly true of some series we've made at Kyo called the Welcome To series. So Welcome to Lagos, Welcome to India, which I made, and Welcome to Rio, the latest one. And by spending a lot of time on the ground and working a lot with a very dedicated team of local fixers and translators who really get to know the people you're working with as well, I think there becomes an understanding and a collaboration there as well. But yeah, it doesn't always go according to plan, and you can't foresee everything. And I'd just like to show one more clip in a moment. About a couple that we filmed with on a beach in Mumbai called Rajesh and Savita, and they were living in an illegal settlement on the beach and wanted to tell their story about their repeated demolitions by the authorities of their houses and everyone around them, which they generally rebuild the following day. But like many people in the informal economy, Rajesh's business was also illegal, and while this is an important part of the story we wanted to tell, it would cause some headaches later on. So Rajesh, wanted to tell his story. We talked through what we were trying to do, but clearly broadcasting this, could have consequences for Rajesh. When the director talked to him at the beginning of the filming period, and we were filming in India for over 5 months, he thought he'd be well out of that area by the time of transmission, which was, again, a long time after we finished filming. But as the edit continued, we realised he was still there, and obviously, while we wanted to be truthful to his story and include the realities of his life, we didn't want to end up meaning that someone, either he ended up in jail or probably more likely was subject to a large amount of extortion. And I think maybe belatedly we realised, not belatedly, but it's much clearer now than it was then a few years ago that the hours after broadcast in the UK, that could well be on YouTube and be seen by someone in India who might decide to do something about it. I think that's now made much clearer in BBC guidelines and other places. So as broadcast approached, or the edit continued, we realised that we needed to do something about this. And the next time that Rajesh's house was demolished, which happened fairly frequently, actually the beach was cleared very rather more permanently, and the director who's working with him on the project and Key Films were able to make sure that he was sort of had somewhere legal to live in a different part of the city after that. But I think it's flagged up that with these very long-term projects, and with being so embedded into people's lives, then your responsibility carries on for, of course, a long time. So yeah, different approaches and different considerations, and I think there are some generalisations that can be brought, but maybe look at that later.
Well, thank you, Tom, and thank you both Jezza and Tom at that point, because I think you've set up very clearly some of the major ethical issues from our point of view, and it's perfect that Femi is next in this lineup here, which thankfully nobody will be held responsible for afterwards because it's not going on YouTube. But Femi, you're in Nigeria. You've got probably a completely different set of thoughts when it comes to ethics, so take it away.
Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me here, Jane, and to One World. It's a really exciting thing to be part of this conversation because I think for us in Nigeria, Nigeria is a very popular filming destination for news and documentary. Fair filming simply means access. And I've put together a short video to sort of give you an idea of what I mean by that. Sure. The quality of the video isn't great. I put it together just to make a point. The point that I think is important for me to make is that access at the center of filming in places like Nigeria is really key. In terms of ethics, I have been a fixer for hundreds of filming crews that have come to Nigeria. There's a lot of things that you discover right away from the moment that they land. There's that disconnect between who they are and what that environment is. I think he referred to it as realizing that the culture in which you're filming is valid. It's this question of civilization where you feel that the people where you are filming are not really civilized enough to understand the issues inside which they live. So you take the research material that you've got and you pursue the story based on the angles that you have decided before you came. The trouble is, for people like myself, I've been a producer, I own a production company, I run a documentary film festival, yet when people hire me as a fixer, they rather that I just drive and shut up. People actually say things to me like, don't touch the camera. And it's really amusing because half the time, the story they're trying to tell, I probably have more information for them than they have, paying researchers working from here. There's also a lot of things that go on ethically. People don't tell me the story they're telling. I mean, I'm not allowed to see the script. They ask me to get a filming permit. I get a filming permit based on false information. And sometimes after the crew have left, I'm the one that has to answer the questions. And it's usually not palatable because by the time the security agencies let you know that you don't know who you have worked with and what they're actually doing, it's really normally quite very embarrassing. And that to me isn't just the end of it. Nigeria has the third film producing country in the world. I mean, we make a lot of stuff. Not all of them are great, but we make a lot of stuff. There's a lot of equipment in Nigeria. I run a production company, I rent out equipment. I've never had one crew in the hundreds that I have worked with who would say, can we hire your equipment? No, they would rather bring the equipment in, bribe the customs to bring them in, and probably pay the customs much more than I will hire them the equipment. Those for me are the things that sort of let you know that you have no access, even though you're working with these guys. But the story that I put in that film about the village on the lagoon is really fascinating to me because they actually manufacture stories for the crews. Half of the people that people talk to in those places sometimes don't live there. But they are appointed as spokesmen because they speak well, they articulate. So they actually front and half the time, the people who come to film don't know this. But I'm the fixer, I know this. But I'm not asked, so I can't say. Those are the margins, the gaps that I find to be fascinating. The really amusing story from my coming here was that the film, the film that we did where I was interviewed for the BBC about Lagos, I never saw it for 5 years. And I put it in this film, and I walked into Sheffield, the registration center, to have a meeting with Jane, and there he was with the film. The first time I actually saw the film was when I walked in here. And if you look at the film and look at me now, you possibly can't even believe it, because I look so much younger and better in the film. But really, it's all about access. It's all about, you know, not just, we're not asking that the film crews come with a cross. You're not going to change everybody's life. But there are ways in which you can provide access to the film itself within the country in which you have told the story, so that those who are in government can actually do something if they wish. Most of the time, they see this film. The first people that see these films are security agents. They are usually the ones who have people here who see the film on, on TV and talk about it back there. The whole rights issue needs to be discussed so that when you shoot in a place, the people of that place can actually see themselves. There is a way in which watching themselves, however you have treated the story, validates their experiences, where they are in their lives. And I think really for me, that's really what captures how I see it from our side. But I really think the great thing for me to say is it's a great start that I'm actually allowed in the conversation to start with. So that when Jane said to me, would you come and be part of this, I definitely couldn't miss it. Because if nothing else, it starts, the whole idea of us being part of our story being told out there. Thank you.
Thank you. I must point out that the Jane that Femi keeps referring to is that woman there, Jane Moat, who is in fact one of our board members of One World Media. So today that's her position that we're admitting to. And there is actually a logic in the way that this panel has been set up, or in the order we're going, because we now move to Siobhan Sinnerton, who I think can answer some of that. Of course, we are very lucky to have a benign panel today, but we can attack those who we know are not benign during the Q&A.
I'm astonished to hear some of the people could be so dumb as to not take some of that on board, and there's an awful lot to talk about there, and I'm really interested also to know to what extent you have said all of that directly to the producers that you're working with, and what their response is to it. But from my point of view, so it's a great privilege, I think, to be a commissioning editor of Foreign Affairs. I've commissioned probably, I think, close to 100 unreported worlds now, which is Channel 4's main foreign affairs strand. And you have a lot of big decisions to make about what content you commission. And I think the first thing that I really wanted to do whenever I took over Unreported World was, Unreported World it's always been a great strand, but it did definitely used to be much more focused on, I have to say, largely white, largely male, reporters running around often in khaki gear, telling us what people in the rest of the world thought about what was going on in their own countries. It was much more reportage based, and I suppose the one thing that I really wanted to do was to try and adjust the focus of that much more on to give much more of a voice to people, so that they can tell their own stories rather than everything be interpreted through us. It's still a reporter-led series, so it's always a balancing act. But I just wanted us to have local voices telling us about their own lives. I think I'm probably going to show you what I would call an example of best practice from the series. Best practice in terms of that. The central character is a midwife in the Central African Republic, but also afterwards I'll talk about best practice in relation to the shooting, the making, and the editing of that clip. And relax. So the film was about the chronic lack of maternal health care in the Central African Republic. What I loved about it is, I mean, actually, weirdly, in that clip, it's Shay that does most of the talking, the reporter that does most of the talking, but that's because Olga clearly is a little bit busy at the time. But the rest of the film really follows this extraordinary woman around the Central African Republic and just experiences her daily life, her separation from her family, going off to deliver babies in the bush, the danger that she faces. So the team spent about 3 weeks just with Olga, not really with anybody else. So they really, really, really got to know her. They really built up an amazing relationship of trust with her. So from my point of view as a commissioner, there's a brilliant Central African Republic character. The team have spent so much time really building up a relationship of trust with her. It's not like in a lot of medical stories, particularly about Africa, but elsewhere as well. There's always a European doctor that kind of sails in to save the day. This really very often happens, and that was not the case in this film at all. It was, it was Olga absolutely that saved the day. So the woman who was giving birth, this is also just talking from what is best practice in a situation like that. Obviously, she'd been in labour. The twins didn't suddenly arrive. She'd been in labour. Olga had asked her in advance, talked through exactly what she was doing, why she was doing it, if she wanted to take part. And then the team visited her after the twins were born. And then again, a week and a half later, they went to see her with the twins at home to again explain what they'd filmed, what the arrangement was. And actually, for an Unreported World point of view, it's quite different, because Unreported World, we've fought quite hard to be the only Channel 4 film that is ungeo-blocked, for the very reasons that you suggest, that we feel that it's really important that people in the countries that we're making the films about have a chance to see those films themselves. So that adds a whole another layer of complication, of course, particularly, I'm sure we'll talk about safeguarding people's safety in those countries. If you can see those films in their home countries, there are other issues that throws up. But so we need to make sure that Olga understands, and that particularly the woman who is, she's what we would think she's at her most exposed. Actually, that's slightly us putting our Western construct on the notion of showing nudity in childbirth is anything weird. She was absolutely fine with it. So there was, it was best practice on the ground. And then when the film went out, an amazing thing happened on social media, where people just fell in love with Olga, and some genius, not anything to do with us, I have to say, came up with the hashtag Team Olga, which trended across the UK, and people were just absolutely blown away by her and saying wonderful things about her. And somebody at one of the NGOs that she worked with Olga obviously is not on social media, had the brilliant idea of printing off all of these tweets. And so Olga, in her remote little clinic, and it is incredibly remote, was delivered a big stack of paper like this of all these messages from people in the UK telling her how wonderful her work was. And then it ended up, the icing on the cake really, I think it was just a couple of days before Christmas. This went out in December, I think. And a couple of days before Christmas, we got a call from the NGO that Olga worked with to say that they had just had a massive donation as a result of the film going out that has now built a new wing in their maternity hospital. So for lots of different reasons, it felt like, obviously we're very far from perfect, but I thought it would be a good idea to show some example of good practice as well as bad.
Siobhan, thank you. Helen.
Hi. So before I go into the ethical problems that we've faced and some of our ways of dealing with them, I just wanted to give a slightly broader context on what I do, because I think I come at this from a slightly different perspective from many of the other panellists. Excuse me, I have a cold. So I represent Discovery Networks International, and we not only film, but we also broadcast in over 200 countries. And the dominant voice of the programmes we made used to be, until a few years ago, predominantly a US voice. And increasingly in the last few years, we've increased the level of local and international programmes we make. I joined Discovery about 3 years ago, and I was immediately struck by the very different approach which challenged a lot of what I thought about programme making. And to make that concrete, I'll give you an example of a treatment I was brought about 2 years ago, and I think this was one of the first things I discussed with Shyama, which really made me aware of how I needed to change the way I was thinking. So I was looking for some new animal natural history programming, and a production company brought me an idea, a very authentic idea, of an engaging, charismatic vet who had already been approached and was going to do all of this anyway. It wasn't a construct for television. He had been approached to go and help renovate and improve the fortunes of a zoo and wildlife park in Kenya. I met him. I thought he was extremely articulate. He had had a commitment for over 10 years to working throughout the developing world, helping them in their veterinary practices. And so I thought, this sounds like a really great, positive story. I spoke to my colleagues in the Middle East and African teams, and their immediate response was, why on earth would we want that show? That show shows rich white guy riding into the rescue again. We're fed up with that story. We don't want to see it anymore. And it dawned on me, of course they wouldn't. Why would they? And so I think what is perhaps different from in the context that I'm working is that we already know that whereas Femi was talking about their programmes that he might be involved with not getting seen in the countries, we know that the programmes we make internationally will always be seen in the country that they're being filmed in, and also in every other country. And I think it means that we have an incredibly big responsibility to ensure that the stories we tell about those countries are ones that the countries and the audiences in those countries would want to see. Now, the types of programmes that we make are very largely different from some of the shows, amazing shows that go out on Unreported World or shows that Jezza makes. I mean, those tell, of course, incredibly important stories, stories we must tell, stories where change is vitally important. But I think that it's also important to tell other stories, stories of normalisation, stories where the dominant narrative is not one of disaster, poverty and suffering, stories where people are not being passive recipients of support and aid from outside, but are having agency in taking responsibility for their own lives and their own change. So the clips that I have to show are fact-ent style programmes. They are not issue-based programmes at all. But I think that as part of the media ecology, it's important that we see stories which display a broader experience, a common experience, a normal experience of people having everyday lives. The first clip I've got is, if I could show the trading up clip, please. So Mike Brewer is a presenter who is very successful in a series we do called Wheeler Dealers. And he wanted to show that it was possible to trade up from a very basic car, a clapped-out Ford Escort, to a supercar. And he travels around the world to try to do that. And if you show the clip. So when we're engaging with people in local countries, we try, and I'm sure we don't always succeed, but we try in our international programming to represent and recognise the expertise present in the regions we visit. And that was a very brief example. We've just started making a new programme about engineering. And of course, we do use presenters, and the central presenter in this show is also an English guy. He's an engineer and he's a journalist, and he's looking at blunders around the world in engineering and how they're fixed. And at the very start of the development process, the idea was developed by my colleague Liz McIntyre, who's going on to be the CEO of here at Sheffield very shortly. And right from the start, we thought, how can we make sure we don't come across as just in the presenter going and sorting out all the problems? So partly to make the budget go further, and partly because we thought it was a good idea anyway, Justin investigates a range of problems, but he engages the help of local journalists on the ground to help him to do that. And we were very, very careful while we were doing that process to ensure that we didn't refer to Justin and his team, because we felt that that would suggest that he was the boss and they weren't. We talked about Justin and the reporters he's working with. So there's another little clip here about an extraordinary road in Latin America, Chile, I think. So what we did there was, in every country that we wanted to visit, we made sure that the people were local to that region, that they could speak to the local people in their own language. And for our regions around the world, they can obviously broadcast these things without subtitles, and it feels like that they're getting a closer connection. But it's also a fantastic way for us to find new talent. There are a couple of the reporters there who have done 3 or 4 minute items in the main series, who we think have enormous potential to become presenters in their own right and to lead their own stories. So I think there's a long way to go. There is a lot that we need to do that could be improved on, but I think that we feel that that we're dealing with the kind of the everyday, the popular entertainment shows, and showing that people from all around the world have got great stories to tell that are not just about suffering. They're about fun. They're about solving their own problems, and they're just about the everyday stuff that engages all of us and that we like to watch.
Thank you, Helen. Thank you to all the panel. We'll open up for questions now and comments. I think there were themes that kept coming up. The contrariness of wanting to safeguard the people that you're covering and at the same time giving them access and all of those around them access. How do you manage the two together? I think obviously issues of wanting to highlight social injustice without committing a social injustice. In other words, giving people a voice and their own voice rather than giving your voice to their problem. There are all sorts of issues that have come up. It will be really interesting because we are trying to create this idea of fair filming, and we're trying to kind of put labels on it in a sense to be able to say this is what it looks like. It would be lovely if you've got questions for the panel and thoughts about what you've been hearing. Thank you. I think that was really, we doubled the amount of time I thought it was going to take, but those clips were just fantastic, and I thought the narratives around them, each one just brought something fresh to the whole debate. And we've really, quite surprisingly, I suppose because we're talking about one world and a globe, we have actually, I feel, gone around 360 degrees just now. So if you can help us with that journey to continue it, we will be very happy to take comments from the floor. Yes, please wait till the mic comes to you. Thank you.
No worries. I have a question that was raised by Femi, which was about sort of how people go to places already knowing the story they're going to tell. And that I wondered if that was, whether you'd noticed any differences in different types of productions. So whether bigger productions, this is to all the panel really, but Femi raised the interesting point that people going to a foreign country with a story they already know what it's going to be and not adapting and not being flexible to what they see in front of them. Whether that changes maybe more for indie productions versus big productions, or whether it's just different types of stories that need different types of ways to deal with them in the local country.
Start with Jezza and Tom, you clean up on that one, Femi.
I mean, oh, sorry, that woke everyone up. You know, I think that comes down to your journalism. You know, that comes down to the journalism of the crew. You know, I have often gone to a country with a concept. I mean, in the commissioning process, you draw up a document that is, you know, is the one that is commissioned upon. But I'd say that more times than not, the film you end up making is not the film that was originally conceived, not in its entire form. Clearly, when I went to Gaza, it was going to be a film about Gaza or Zimbabwe, etc. But I think, no, it's very important, and this is a fundamental lesson I think that anyone can draw from this, is you've got to be prepared to change on the ground. You've got to be prepared to think you know the story, but actually discover a different story. I mean, I'm as in shock as I know Siobhan will be at the fact that he has never been asked anything before, because our golden rule is your driver and your fixer are the two most important people to you in your life, because RTAs are the biggest killer out there, and so your driver, you better make sure you get a good one, and your fixer's the man or woman who knows everything about where you are. So for me, China's Stolen Children, which was the first film I ever made, which, you know, I was incredibly lucky with, and it did quite well. You know, my driver actually got me two of the main stories in that film, because I chatted to him and told him what we were trying to do. And honesty and integrity should come right from the start with the people you're working with, because they need to understand. I mean, obviously, it's also easy to sort of stand on a pedestal and say this. You know, I make undercover films quite often, or telling stories from regimes that might not want them told. So clearly it's imperative that my team know what I'm doing, because they're the ones that are being put at risk, and it's imperative the contributors are aware of what I'm doing. Whether we take precautions to protect them from that, that's a different story, but that's essential. So, you know, from my perspective, and from I expect most of the filmmakers that will produce content for Siobhan will certainly, you know, it's absolutely key that you adapt and change and look to what's happening on the ground, and the key person to help you with that would be the people who are helping you, if you see what I mean, locally.
Can I butt in? Just because I think, you know, I think you're absolutely right about the adaptation, and actually that's absolutely at the core of a new series that we're doing at the moment. In fact, something that we're making with Keo Films, in which our adventure explorer survival expert, Ed Stafford, in previous series, he's gone and been dropped off in the middle of nowhere by himself to see if he can survive in a series called Marooned. And he wanted to do something new, and he wanted to go into places and investigate mysterious satellite images and see what was happening on the ground. And in order to achieve that, he needed the help and support of the local people. But we wanted, when we were talking to Keo and they were talking about some of the exciting recce's they'd been on the past, and we were saying, well, those recce's sound much more exciting than a lot of the films we get to make. And so the idea was born that for this series, he would land on the ground. We would know that it was technically possible for him to get where he was going to go. But what he did when he got there, the people that he met, if it went off in entirely a different direction, we just follow that. So he turns up in the middle of Russia and manages to find his way to a school to find a translator. And we probably don't have time to show the clip, but he was in Papua New Guinea, and he got to the place that he wanted to get to and then was told, oh no, you can't film here because it's sacred to us. And he said, well, I don't want to interfere, with your personal beliefs, I won't film. And they all slept on it. And the next morning they said, well, all right, you can, but only if you come with us and, join in with what we're doing. So I think, that very authenticity of kind of following the story really helps us with some of those issues, I think.
Well, I think Femi had a very good point as well. I mean, I think there is a pressure that emanates out probably from the development documents that are drawn up and the commissioning discussions and all of the rest that envisage a film in a certain way, and that sort of pressure is then taken out with the crew, and absolutely the crew should be listening to their fixer and more than anyone else. But I think it's an important point that there needs to be bravery from the top down to go with what you find on the ground and actually reflect what you find, and also have the time there to explore it properly, so that you do understand the world that you're trying to make a film about. Absolutely, there should be room for the fixer to have a big input on all of that, and it should happen more. I think that we are in anthropology. There is a very slow sort of move to more of that happening. I think Inda's films with the Kate Humble thing that was on Friday night, Kate Humble living with nomads, were quite brave in showing her having big discussions about money at the beginning of that film, and I think transparency in that way and going with what you find is really important.
Well, I think the real important thing that I tell a lot of folks who come to Nigeria is that nothing really looks like it seems from outside. You've got a country with so many different cultures, but so many different politics and so many different undercurrents to every issue, that it's not just, it's not always what you see that you're reporting. And I think you always need people on ground to sort of give you the different layers of this thing. And if you're really very unbending in the way that you wish to tell your story, obviously it's not really about that culture, which is why I loved that phrase about the validity of the culture itself and the fact that you have to figure it out first and foremost. And in terms of the kind of people, there's just so many crews that come out there. I'm so pleased to hear what some of the people on this panel are doing. Evidently, the bigger the structure, perhaps the more accountability there is. But there is also a whole world of crews that are showing up, that are making films to interest commissioning editors, not being commissioned to make the film. So they're all over the place. And they do come in, and they do look for all kinds of stories, and some of them are merely triggered from what they read in the news. But by the time they get on ground, what they read in the news has so many shades that really, if you don't get with the culture, what you really get, it's not the story that you really want. It's what you decided.
I'm Siobhan, you're not wanting to come back on that, are you?
I mean, I have to say, I think it is slightly different than current affairs. I would like to think that you're quite focused on what your story is and that you know what it is before you go there, to be honest. And obviously, if you get there and it's not true, then it's not true, and you either come back or you find a different story. But like an unreported, there are three-person teams. There's a reporter, there's a producer shooter, and then there's the local journalist stroke producer that we work with on the ground, and who you've spoken to for weeks before you get there, and who generally we've worked with quite a few times before, because we tend to work with the same people, and because we've done so many, there's a network of people that we really trust. So by the time you get there, it's, if the story isn't what it appears to be, we've got a bit of a problem generally, I have to say.
Right, lovely, thank you. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to give a voice to the voiceless here. So I'm going to point to about 3 or 4 people, if you just take it in turn to, and then we'll come back. Mark, I know you, so you, and then you and the stripies. Number 3, number 4, we'll do this side, number 5, and then there's one on this side, number 6. So, I don't know where the mics are. So, Mark, number 1.
It's Mark Galloway, Director of IBT, the International Broadcasting Trust. It's been a fascinating discussion. It's such a huge subject. I think it's really important that we revisit the ethics of filming. But what I thought was interesting about this session, you said in the opening, Shyama, is there a kite mark, that your organisation is advocating a kite mark? And I don't know if you're familiar with the Albert kite mark, that is the carbon footprint of programmes. And that's received a huge boost because Sky has made it obligatory for all production companies to comply with that kite mark. So I think the broadcasters are key here. So I want to ask Siobhan and Helen, would your broadcasters, can you see a scenario where they would subscribe to a kite mark that was a fair filming kite mark? And what would that look like? It's such a huge subject.
Thank you. We'll come back. All of those will get answered. Yeah, lady in stripes.
My question was, you said that for the midwife film, that they spent 3 weeks before the whole crew with her and...
No, during the whole filming period was 3 weeks.
Oh, okay. I thought they spent 3 weeks before.
No, with her.
Because my question was more like if there's a budget for this to actually spend time with the people, or it's just in and out and yeah.
Do you want me to come back to that?
We'll come back to that. Thank you.
Yes, so many interesting things. I thought every one of Femi's comments could turn into a protocol, quite in an interesting way if you're thinking about your kite mark. But the specific thing I wanted to ask, perhaps provocatively, why can't we? You mentioned earlier on that a certain interview couldn't be done in the UK for legal reasons. It could be done there. You mentioned about the birth. You might not film a British woman in that way, but it was okay there. Why don't we just apply the same attitudes to the people we film outside the UK as we'd apply here? Because the way we represent them can affect our attitudes here. Why should a woman's body be more available to our view because she's in a foreign country?
Thank you. I think it was going this way, wasn't it? The lady on the end.
So, I totally agree that people should tell their stories with their own voice, but there's another challenge that comes up, which is to be understood by the Western audience or the international audience. And for example, I'm from Gaza, I'm Palestinian from Gaza, and I shot a film during the 2008 war, and it created a big buzz in the Arab world and the Arab festivals, but it barely went to like maybe 2 or 3 international film festivals. So again, there's another challenge of how to tell your story, and I started thinking that I must make my second documentary feature documentary in a way that can be easily understood by the West, and then it loses its like privacy about the place and about the people. So it's always challenging. Don't know if you have any thoughts about it.
Well,
Thanks.
We may well have some thoughts about it. I think, was there not one more person on this side? Yes. And then we're coming to you.
Hi, my name's Leah Philcox. I'm an anthropologist as well. I actually did some research for Keo Films, which I think fed into Welcome to India. As an anthropologist, you have the ethical guidelines set by the Association of Social Anthropologists. And in that, one of the key things is you don't film anything, or well, most anthropologists are not filming, but I'm a visual anthropologist, I do film, is to not put anybody in a position where their lives are at risk or what they do is at risk. So, for example, your guy selling liquor on the beach in Mumbai, you obviously negotiated that risk with him. I made a film in India with a woman, she's got a Czechoslovakian passport. So she's completely illegal, she's been there for a very long time, there is no more Czechoslovakia, obviously. So she's, sort of lives quietly under the radar. And I made a lovely film about her, and she's pushing for that to go out. But I'm concerned about what that will mean for her life if I put that out. But she's less concerned. So what do you do when you're more aware of the risks than they are? She's saying, oh no, put it out, get it in festivals and everything. I'm like, what's that going to do to you? It's unresolved at present. But when they're less concerned than you are about their ethical, that aspect.
Okay, thank you. And the gentleman here.
My question relates quite closely to this one and to another question from there about Jezza's really striking observation that the raped South African girl's case had that happened here and been filmed here, would not be allowed to be broadcast here. And I'm wondering precisely why would it not have been allowed here, and are those reasons good reasons or not? I noticed there was immediately applause for the idea that that same censorious standard should be applied if the abuse had happened in a foreign country, just as it's applied here. But it seems to me that you were saying, and that the subject of your film wanted that story told, and that therefore, you know, the censorious law that means that if it had happened here, it couldn't be told, is probably a bad thing.
Okay, thank you. Well, there were three questions there, I think, which were all about representation, tying them together, which was the why don't we have the same standards irrespective of where we are, and in fact that's something that we're really looking at in terms of the duty of care changing across territories. So that would be quite interesting if our panel could just explain that and succinctly. Also, Siobhan and Helen, you need to answer the question, if there was a kite mark, would you respect it when you received a proposal on your desks? Budgets, and also just how do you make something for a Western audience if you are a homegrown filmmaker creating something for a wider audience? You know, perhaps there ought to be actually a fair filming. There should be a series of protocols to help those who want to get material shown in the West from other parts. Maybe that's the answer. Should we start at this end?
Yeah, I mean, to your point, first of all, about the same standards applying. I mean, if you, I don't know if there's anybody here who has made films for me. Jezza, I suppose. There's nobody else here, but that I'm like a broken record with that. It's exactly the same. You have to apply exactly the same standards, and it's it's obviously far more difficult, especially in very remote areas. Things like consent. You know, if you're filming at a school in the UK, obviously you send letters home to all of the parents and you make sure that they all sign up and that they all know that their child is being filmed. Well, that's quite hard to do in Sudan or Baghdad or whatever, but we insist that they do it, and if that's not done, then the kids' faces won't be shown. I mean, that's where we've got, so our consenting is exactly the same, whether it's here. On Unreported World, it's the same, whether it's here or whether it's there. With specific reference to the woman, what we do is we ask somebody how they want to be shown. How, you know, what you film what you film, and then you say what are you comfortable with. And this also goes to the safety and security question, actually. You know, what level of anonymization do you want? And that woman, after several conversations on different days, said that she was perfectly happy to be shown the way she was. If you are filming One Born Every Minute, it's very rare that a woman will say that. It just doesn't. It's just a completely different culture or cultural idea of what's appropriate. It is. So actually you're asking yes. No, you're fine. You're absolutely intended. Well, all I'm saying is we use the same measure of consent and how people want to be represented here as we would there as we would here. I think what you're saying,
Siobhan, basically is that we would watch an English mother giving birth naked like that too, if she would give us the permission to. She just doesn't. So it's not about what the viewer will watch, but about what the person who's being filmed will agree what is happening with.
Yeah.
I mean, I agree, and I think it's also important that we're careful not to take the opinion that all of the standards that we have are automatically the right and correct ones. I think that, you know, we really do need to interrogate. understanding a diversity of perspectives and a diversity of cultures. So something that we might have as a standard as being appropriate in this country, people might feel uncomfortable about being shown if we're broadcasting something in a different country. So, for example, we are very aware that when we make our international programs, there are sometimes certain elements when they're shown in countries like Malaysia or other Muslim-based countries in the Far East, where they say, and we speak to the people in the country, which is why we have representatives on the ground in almost every country that we broadcast in, so that we can speak to local expertise and say, you know, is this, when you're looking at this, is there anything that your audience will be uncomfortable with? And I think, you know, that it's important to feel, if this was filmed in my country, if this was filming me, would I feel comfortable? But it's also important to get the perspective of the people in the other countries.
Yeah, I mean, I was actually going to, which you did very kindly for me, is turn the question on the head. You know, it's not necessarily about should we be giving the child the right to speak in that country? It's should we be giving the child the right to speak in this country, which has been touched on here. I mean, fundamentally, the approach we take is that, you know, children have rights under the UN Charter. Any country that's ratified the UN Convention on the Rights of a child has a right to free speech. Now, where the line gets drawn in the sand, I think, is about whether that child is fully aware of what they are undertaking, whether their community is aware of what they're undertaking. That's the key. It's not just about the child, it's about, do the people around them know? And if the people around them know and understand it and understand the risks, who are we to say you can't do it? Because the point is, they want to have this voice. They want to be able to tell their story. Because if they tell their story, 9 times out of 10, you find there's a huge cathartic release from telling that story. Because normally, particularly with children, they're never given the chance. That's why, ultimately, yes, I've made a lot of films with kids. And, you know, if you look at any of my programming, I tell stories through children because I think it's really important we listen to children, and they've got an awful lot to tell us about society and the society they're in. And when we look at other societies, let's take away the imperialism. Surely aren't we looking at those societies just as much so we can learn from them? Because so many societies have so much to offer. And I've never been to a country, and I'm sure I can say for anyone that's been a filmmaker here, every time you come back from a country, you're always going, oh, everyone's just so friendly, and oh God, you know, everyone's always making a cup of tea, and you're like, no, you've got barely anything. And so I think it's really important. The reasons you couldn't show it here is because of the laws on child protection in regards to, you know, sexuality and sexual offences. So you wouldn't be able to show it until the child's 18. That's the laws of Britain. But then every country has a different legal standing on all sorts of different issues. Things you could, you know, you've seen, you know, trial by chat show in America. You know, that doesn't happen here. So I think we break it all the way down, really, and the realistic, whether you should show something or not showing something is all about informed consent. And where do you draw the line, the question was asked, and not allow it to be shown? That's a decision that ultimately you will have to make and you will have to live with. And you need to discuss that around the people that you're working with, and you need to discuss that around the community. I was in Kashmir making a film called Kashmir's Torture Trail. It's on the tin what's going to happen to those people if they get caught talking to me, right? We interviewed a guy who had his feet chopped off. So we knew the end result of these people. And there was a decision made where I decided that the young boys who wanted to tell their story about pelting the police should be shot in shadow. And it's one of the only times I think I've ever taken a decision to suggest to a contributor that they really should not do this overtly, because they really didn't fully understand the implications of what they were going to be letting themselves into. Whereas the older boys, who'd already been arrested before, who'd already had their fingernails ripped off, clearly they knew what they were letting themselves in for, so I had to let them have their voice. But when it got down to the younger boys, we felt, really, do you really want to do this? I'd strongly suggest you don't, and we didn't. We shot them in shadow.
Yeah, I think the idea of applying the same standards seems a good one, but yeah, there is this issue of cultural interpretations of what is fair, and is that different in a different part of the world? And we have very strong ideas within our own culture, but that could be different. As a slightly tongue-in-cheek example, setting up Welcome to India and spending a huge amount of time on the ground, looking for the most resourceful, entrepreneurial people that we could find in the densest districts of Kolkata and Mumbai. The people we found, as far as they're concerned, they're hugely resourceful people, fair, open, straightforward, was cold hard cash essentially, and that was a difference of opinion of what we felt was fair, and the only way forward from that is by sitting down and having discussion and finding the cultural middle ground. I think applying exactly the same standards might prove problematic.
Well, I think also we need to add to that an awareness of how some of these images also represent a regurgitation of how people see civilization. I think it's really important because someone might give informed consent, but is it decent? Can it be avoided? Is also important because ultimately the issue of what is civilized sometimes creeps into this as well, where you end up with people using those same images as the reason why they think where you have come from is uncivilized. Undeveloped is different from uncivilized, and I think that's the measure of decency that I think also needs to be added to these considerations.
It's a great line. Undeveloped is different from uncivilized. I think somebody's desperate for a last word here in the front row.
I'd just like to add one thing while we're waiting for the question too, and that is, do remember, as filmmakers, we are not just responsible for the contributors and the countries we're in, we're also responsible to you as viewers. So we have to make sure that what we show you on the television has honesty, integrity behind it. So part of that is about what we show. And if we choose to remove certain aspects from our films because we don't think it's the right thing to do, we may also, therefore, be skewing the film, and therefore our piece might not be the right one. I mean, I was slammed because on Zimbabwe's Forgotten Children, I didn't pay the 50p to send Orbit to school. And some people said, how could you not? That was a moment you should have stepped in. Everybody has 50p in their pocket. To the point that HBO didn't even take the film because Sheila Nevin was aghast at the fact that I didn't. You know, so that actually cost me the fact that the film didn't get screened over there. But I still felt it was really important I didn't, because then I was crossing a line that shouldn't be crossed. And that is obviously on a minutiae of level, and it's not, no danger was involved there. However, those are other decisions that you're making as a filmmaker. Sorry.
Just a final thought that it's not just the legacy for the people who are featured, it's also the people who are making. And we hear a lot about fixers and drivers. We can already see Femi's a filmmaker, but he's reduced to being a driver by almost every crew that works with him. And yet there are these amazing opportunities. Can you see a time when actually your crews will look like Femi? That we won't be, there'll be more percentage of your crews actually trained and able to make the films that you're making rather than flying in people every time we go to different parts of the world.
Thank you. And just to say, actually, on that last note, your question wasn't answered, but at One World Media, we are looking at ways of creating commissioning rounds for filmmakers from outside the UK wanting an audience here. So that is actually also on our list. Thank you very much to this wonderful panel, the two kite runners on the end, Helen, Hawken and Siobhan Sinnerton. You didn't answer the question about whether you'd accept.
We didn't get a chance.
We didn't get a chance. I mean, I think it's definitely something we should look into. I think it's a very complicated issue you've raised, but, we should meet up afterwards and talk about it. I think it's really important.
I do too, but actually much more importantly, I think the issue of working with local talent on the ground and local talent on the ground being given the opportunity to work with crews who are there across the board is, if there's some way that we can, there's some central way of setting up a system like that, where even if it is shadowing or whatever, I think that could really bear fruit.
Definitely.
Well, that's a very positive note to end on, and I hope that Femi Odugbemi, who has so generously come here today,
takes heart from that and remembers to give everybody his business card. To Tom Beard and Jezza Neumann, thank you so much, because you sort of slightly put yourselves in the lion's jaws as people on the ground creating this programme material. So thank you all for a really interesting 90 minutes. Thank you for being a terrific audience. And that's it. Off we go. Have a good